Okay, let's get started with content-based teaching. Again, very elemental approach to this, but here we go. So content-based teaching, key questions for self-quizzing for before and after. So first question is, what is content-based teaching? Can you define it? And try to answer this question before the talk and then after as well. What is additive bilingualism? And that's kind of a key point if we're going to be teaching second language learners, young kids, for example. And so we need to know what that is. What kind of objectives should a teacher have in a content-based lesson? There are two kinds. And what is pop-up grammar? How does that work? And what is a dictogloss? So getting started, right? We'll talk about the weak version of content-based language instruction. And that is that you learn English in order to use content. So you learn English so you can understand content. The strong version of content-based instruction is you use content in order to learn English. So it's strong in the sense of its emphasis, that it strongly believes in communication. So let's look at some principles from content-based instruction, right? This is from Richards and Rogers. So teaching is organized around the content or information that students will acquire rather than around linguistic or other type of syllabus. So that's from Richards and Rogers. A key point is that, again, from Richards and Rogers, people learn a second language more successfully when they use the language as a means for acquiring information rather than an end in itself. Again, more principles from Richards and Rogers. Content-based instruction better reflects the learner's needs for learning a second language. Why are you learning English? To understand content, right? Or to be able to talk about it. So a key point, again, from Richards and Rogers is a number of studies say that second languages are best learned when the focus is on mastery of content rather than on mastery of language per se. So there's evidence to support content-based instruction, right? So, and again, from Richards and Rogers, this may not be from Richards and Rogers, it might be a different quote. And I don't have the reference, I apologize for that, but first, it is important for children to establish literacy in their native language before learning to read and write in another language. We call this additive bilingualism. And so first language is the foundation of literacy. When you have your first language skills in place, then you can start to use them reading, for example, in a second language. So when you prepare a content-based lesson, it's important to have content objectives. So what will the students do with the content? Will they be able to understand it, talk about it, summarize it? But also, it's important to set language objectives. So what language will they learn as they start to understand this content? For example, will they learn vocabulary or grammar, or will they be able to master discourse, or be able to take a long turn in communicating about something? What are the language and content objectives in a content-based lesson? Stephen Krashen, in a talk that I heard him give, talked about this idea of pop-up grammar. Interestingly, that Krashen talked about it since he's the content guy, the input guy. So for example, after students read a text, the teacher might point out every example of the present passive, are located, are called, is used. And so just helping the students raise consciousness. It's called consciousness raising. Get the students to be aware of different grammatical elements in a text, for example. That's pop-up grammar. This idea of a dictogloss is actually quite interesting, so I'm going to list it all up here. So three elements or three main steps of dictogloss. The teacher reads a text, a story. Let's say it's a story about Michael Jordan, and the students listen for the main ideas. Then the teacher reads it again. Students listen for details. Maybe they take notes. And then individual students try to reconstruct the story about Michael Jordan from memory, right? And then they come into pairs and compare their reconstructions. And then they try to reconstruct the whole story from working together, right? And so the students vote in the end on the best reconstruction. So again, teacher reads a story about Michael Jordan. Students listen individually for main ideas. Teacher reads it again. Students listen for details, make notes. Then each individual tries to reconstruct the text from memory and then go and compare their reconstructions in groups, and then reconstruct one as a group or as a pair, and then they share their reconstructions with the class, and the students vote on the best reconstruction. All right. So what was the goal of this dictogloss, paragraph organization, maybe functions in discourse, understand, enjoy a story, and tell others about it. All right, so let's talk about scaffolding. So with scaffolding, basically what we're doing is we're preparing learners to understand a text or a talk. So oftentimes teachers in universities in Japan will use TED Talks in English classes, but in order to do that, oftentimes the students need some preparation. So maybe you teach, pre-teach key vocabulary or grammar, or maybe you give a visual outline of the text or talk in advance called a graphic organizer, or maybe you quiz them to guess what the talk is about before they hear it, and so they're prepared for it. You don't want to do too much scaffolding because it gets kind of heavy, but it's a good way to prepare learners for content that might be new or hold new grammar or vocabulary or ideas in there. So that's it. That's a very short and simple summary of content-based instruction. Of course, doing tadoku or big easy reading is one great way to do content-based instruction where learners enjoy stories at their level and learn language, acquire language in a natural and enjoyable way. Thank you for listening.